Welcome to Slayerfest 98. I'm Ian Carlos Crawford, and joining me today for this episode, they are the writer-director of I Saw the TV Glow.
Hi,
Say your name.
I'm Jane Schoenbrun.
Thank you, Jane, for being here. And she was Tara on Buffy. She also cameos in I Saw the TV Glow.
Amber Benson, that's me.
Hi, Amber.
I feel so silly.
I want you both to know that, like, the moment I saw this movie, this is absolutely what I wanted to do. I was like, I hope I can get them both in convo to talk about this because I had so many people texting me to be like, "Are you gonna cover I Saw the TV Glow?" And I was like, "I'm trying something. I'm trying to do a thing." So I really appreciate this. Jane, I have two questions at the top for you. What is your Buffy origin? Is the first one. Well, how did you come to love the show so much that so many Buffy fans have been like, Jane knows the exact experience we all had watching the show?
Yeah, I mean, because I did have the exact experience that they did watching the show. I was Buffy premiered in 97, is that right? 96?
Yeah.
And
97,
as
yeah.
97, I would have been 10 years old.
Ooh.
Uh,
Amber,
I would watch TV in my parents' bedroom when they were downstairs watching on like the good TV. I would like sneak upstairs and I don't know. I think I just flipped past it. It was the first season had aired and there were reruns airing that summer on the WB. I think it was still on Monday night. It hadn't moved to Tuesday yet. And I remember coming across a rerun of the episode The Pack, the one where Xander gets hyena possessed, and just started it halfway through. And you know, I had like been raised on like the movie also talks about Are You Afraid of the Dark and Goosebumps and loved scary teen type things. And so I was just sort of like, oh wait, this is awesome, and made an appointment to be there next week to watch it again. And then just like watched it as it aired. You know, and I think at first it was like, oh, this is so fun. And then somewhere in the middle of season 2, it really became like the biggest emotional sort of companion in my life at that point. And just sort of following the show through my own youth, you know, from 10 to I guess 17 when it ended, you know, as it was just appointment viewing for me, and it was beyond obsession.
Jane, I also have to tell you that this gives me hope as a writer. I like reference Buffy in everything I write. And I have actually gotten the critique like, oh, you shouldn't mention TV shows. And I'm like, but that's like I always think of TV shows, and I always think of like, especially as like a teen, your connection to them because they are like, you know, I remember when we finished Buffy, when we did Chosen, one of my co-hosts, Adam Sass, he's an author. He said this, and I was like, I'm gonna cry. He was like, you know, I'm so glad I got to come back and finish it with you, blah blah blah. Because when we were teens, these were our friends, especially like queer folks. Like these were our this was our group of friends that we got to see every week, and we went through everything with them. We could, even if it didn't actually relate to whatever we were going through, we could somehow relate it. And I think about that a lot in relation. I feel like I'm sure there are other TV shows people feel that way, but I feel like Buffy has a pretty big queer fan base that feels that way, right?
And it's funny, like you just triggered a memory of I guess I would have been like 12 or 13, and I went to like film camp, you know, like nerd summer camp for indoor kids at like the local college. They did this like youth film program in June and July. And you know, I really didn't talk about Buffy much, and this is sort of a part of the movie for me as well. This sort of like double life of being a quote unquote boy who liked Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I was embarrassed about it because it was, as the Fred Durst character says in the movie, a show for girls, but I loved it so much. So it was really, but it was like very church and state. Like I didn't really talk to my friends about it. My family knew I watched it, but I was like kind of kept it in. But I made friends with some girl at that film camp who loved Buffy. And I remember her saying, I remember like where we were in this parking lot when she said to me, she was like, it's like they're my family. And this made it into the movie also. There's like the scene in I Saw the TV Glow where Owen, you see a lot of the like messages that Owen and Maddie have been writing to each other. And Maddie writes to him, Isabel and Tara are like family to me. And is definitely reflecting on, I think, this experience, which I do think is sort of a queer experience of the chosen family of these fictional characters on a television show.
Yeah, hilariously enough, Adam Sass is the one that I keep texting to be like, have you seen it yet? Because his two favorite things are Twin Peaks and Buffy. So I'm like, Adam, I promise this movie is like, you will love it. And I gotta ask you, how did you get this movie made that has so many specific references that are fucking great, but I feel like a lot of companies like don't always love that. So I like it feels so specific to the queer experience that I was like, I love that this even got made. Like I'm curious how you like pitched it. Was it always pitched as like heavy on TV references, or did you kind of just like, we're not going to talk about that aspect because people can relate to it even without knowing like that it's, referencing a bunch
I
of
mean,
shows.
the answer to the question is like witchcraft and sheer force of will, which are
Fair.
maybe the same thing. But I had made a film that did pretty well, that I really made like off the grid and for no money, and knew that because that film had received some acclaim that like I was in a pretty good position to try to like level up, I guess, in terms of like the scope of my next movie. And the movie was written in this sort of like very emotionally raw moment of early transition and reflecting on like a lot of things that weren't about television, or like I'm using television to sort of explore something more personal than just my relationship to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's a film about like trans awakening and looking back on the coping mechanisms that you use to deal with repression, from the other side of it. But yeah, I think that like when you pitch a movie and when you're asking people to give you literally millions of dollars to make some like deeply personal nerd shit, I don't know, there was like the narrative that I brought to the like shareholders of the world, and then there were like the things that I knew inside I needed to protect, or that like they weren't going to care about as much as I did, but I knew that like if I wanted to make a thing I could be proud of, it just needed to be filled with things that I loved, and like the authenticity of the experience and the specificity of it was not always easy to maintain, but
Yeah.
yeah, fought a lot of battles and made something I'm really proud of
I
with other people's money, which is always cool.
that does make it sound nicer. I have people all the time that like, right, they assume that like because you've made a thing that you're rich, and it's like, well, no, like when I was working a retail job, I had one of my coworkers, she was like, well, why do you do this if you have your podcast? And I was like, because I don't make any money doing the podcast. um Amber, I am curious, what got you interested in being a part of this?
Honestly, I got a script and an audition, and I was like, oh, this is something special and important. And I just wanted to be a part of it in any capacity. I feel like what Jane is saying with this film is really important, especially right now. And because of the Buffy connection, I felt like just having any tiny sliver of anything in this movie would connect Buffy in such a specific way that people would walk away from the film. If they love Buffy, they can take the Buffiness and sort of mix it with the trans allegory that is in like built into the script, built into the story. And I think it can change perspectives. It can make people see things in a different way, because this story isn't just a simple story about obsession with a television show. This story is an awakening and a referendum on what it means to be who we are inside, even if that doesn't match what people want us to be. And I just, like I said, I just felt like it was important. And I love that I could be that connector to Buffy, because Buffy meant a lot to a lot of people. And it's not just like alluding to it. We're putting sort of, we're hanging a lantern there and go, look, there's Amber. She's there. It's real. What you're experiencing, you experienced that. And Jane experienced that. And this is like a universal story. So I'm just babbling. I just love it. I just was so honored to be a part of it in any way.
Amber, I mean, you always speak so lovingly about the fans and like Willow and Tara and all. And I feel like as I was like reading some of your interviews, Jane, I was like, man, it's so cool that they got Amber to reference Tara because there's a character. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, we got Tara, we got Amber, and we got Tara.
That's the right words. And you have a character named Tara.
That was amazing.
I promise I don't usually do that. And there's a character named Tara. So it's really cool that did you name Tara first? Or were you like, let's see, like, was that character always named Tara?
Yeah, the character was always named Tara, and it was, I think when I'm sort of developing a movie in my brain, it's not just like what's the plot and what happens in it. It's like sort of like what's the conversation I'm having with myself, and that conversation can lead in lots of different directions. But like Buffy was such a core element of this from the beginning, and so like the strands in my brain of like how Buffy related to this thing that I was making, like inevitably it's going to lead you to Willow and Tara, and it's going to lead you to a conversation around like queer representation on television, and especially in the 90s, like a moment when that there was so much less queer visibility.
Yeah.
And then I think also like the heartbreak of like the end of that relationship on the show, and the way that being kind of like ripped away in the kind of brutal way it was ripped away, as this like maybe like allegory for like the ways in which like living through fictional characters on a TV screen isn't sufficient. So it was like always there. And I knew even if Amber didn't do the movie, that like just having a character in their name Tara was enough of like a physicalization of, like a pretentious, but like a post-structuralist sort of thing of just like, it's not just the movie, like the movie is inviting you to think about these things. But obviously just naming a character and the myriad other Buffy allusions that I worked in there are like nothing compared to this thing that was also incredibly important to me, which was like specifically seeing Amber there, and like in this moment of grace in the middle of the movie that's quiet in its way. But, like I know enough now from reading people's reviews that like people will burst into tears when she opens that door. And, like that was always the hope, is that there could be this moment of grace and not necessarily closure, but like something to let you know that like Amber is Kara, Amber, etc. are like present in this way.
Still here.
I'm gonna fucking cry. That is very beautiful. Like you said, it sounds pretentious, but it does not. It sounds beautiful. And I had so many queer friends, especially queer women and queer trans folks that I like have on this podcast that were like, I cried the moment Amber was on screen, and how that like meant so much to them. And I will say I had to pee towards the like middle of the movie.
No.
And I was like, I can't go pee till I see Amber. She told me it was a cameo, so I don't want to miss her scene. And I was like, oh, this is so nice. And now I have to go pee. But it was like, I was like tearing up seeing Amber. And like, I do think fucking duh, you knew what you were doing. Like it was perfect. And it was like a nice, like Amber, I feel like it was like all these like shining lights behind you, like just coming out like,
I know. I looked lovely.
And Amber, you have done a lot of horror. And people, well, you've been in like,
I thought you were going to say you've done a lot of harm. I was like,
oh no,
you've done a lot of horrible things.
Explain yourself.
I can't.
And I know a lot of people, sometimes I've heard from some actors that have been in a lot of horror that they're like, oh, I actually don't like horror, but I just get cast in it. I don't know if I've asked you, are you a horror gal?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I love horror films.
So was that a thing that first maybe piqued your interest?
I mean, yes, that component is always appealing to me when I read something. But like I said, with this script, I just felt sometimes you read stuff and you're like, oh, this isn't just a movie. This is doing something important. And I actually felt that way with, the Willow Tara relationship, because you were asking me why am I like excited to talk about it or to go on the journey with somebody who comes up to me and is like, this meant something to, because it meant something to me too. And I know that it meant something to lots of other people. And so it transcends. I'm not just like, the lady in the gorilla mask doing the spooky thing, and I'll be that forever, like I like, this is iconic and important, and in a time when there was very little representation, that these characters were portrayed in a very positive way. When I think oftentimes, especially in the 90s, it was just about like, oh, two girls making out. It's a special episode. Let's get eyes on, but it was this idea that like being queer or LGBTQ plus was like a trying to think of the word. I'm getting old. I can't remember words. I do the New York Times crossword puzzle and I sit there and I'm like, what is that dang word? But it's sort of like a way to get people excited and in the moment.
Right. Yeah.
But
like sensationalized.
Sensational. Exactly. And there's no depth to it. Whereas like, I feel like with I Saw the TV Glow and with Buffy, those relationships and what is being said, there's a depth and a level of empathy that I think is needed just in the world, but also needed because people, when you observe it on film and like I always say, you can sell Tide detergent on television, you can sell empathy, you can sell people treating other people with compassion and respect. And I think when you see positive portrayals of characters who are not the norm of what most middle America people deal with every day, you go, oh, wait, those people are just like me. They're all like, we're all the same. We all poop, we all like love. We all like, have food we really enjoy eating, like we all make mistakes and mess up and we connect, I can't tell you how many times I would have like women come up to me and they're like, I watched this show with my kids, and I realized like my kids, the things that were important to my kids that maybe I didn't understand, now I get it because I watched the show with them and I see what's important to them and how they live their lives and who they want to be, and I don't judge. I have empathy and compassion and I love them and I want them to be who they are. And that is the power of what I Saw the TV Glow and Buffy can do. They can change people's minds. They can present things in a way so people understand that we're all human beings together in this, regardless of who we love or what we look like.
Yeah. I mean, Amber, you've heard me say this 25 times to you, I feel like, but my mom was the one that got me into Buffy, and she was not, the age, the demographic they were shooting for, but like my mom just always liked stuff like that. Like she, like Charmed and whatever. And I do feel like that helped my mom be more cool when I came out. Yep. Because she loved Willow and then she loved Tara, and hilariously, she didn't get that they were a couple till like towards the end of season 5.
They were just doing magic. That was just magic.
Well, my mom took it as a 1-for-1. Well, they just do spells and they makes them moan sometimes. Whatever. No big deal.
That's really funny.
Yeah, Jane, do you? This is very different than anything I've done before, where I'm interviewing someone who is also a Buffy fan with Amber. But do you feel like that did help you a lot growing up, like with your identity? Because I do feel like it helped me. I think my corny thing is Buffy and X-Men helped me with my identity growing up.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's maybe a little more complicated for me than that, because it really was like I was saying before, this church and state of my quote unquote real life, and like the emotions that I was putting into not just Buffy, but I think that like Buffy was kind of at the center of it. Like music, was a really big part of my like teen years as well. But like there was something dissociative happening, there was something where like I wasn't capable of loving, I think, in a truthful way, because when you love, you are not just like appreciating an external thing, you are loving as yourself. And I didn't have the courage to be doing that. And I don't think I was like in an environment where that was going to be acceptable. And I never consciously realized that. It's just sort of like after puberty, and when I sort of like saw the way that like boys and girls were being socialized around me, it just like it wasn't something that I felt like I could be a part of, because the role that I was being cast as was not a role that I could play. And so I think so many of those things that I was like holding in, emotionally, that for normal kids, quote unquote, normal kids are getting worked out at like school dances or whatever, like I put into Buffy and into television. And, in one sense, that's like amazing and liberatory. And like, I'm so thankful for it. And in another sense, like there's a sadness, I think, to like loving these fictional characters that like, didn't see me back and couldn't see me back. And like the safety of this one-way mirror of a relationship that I was having with this show through a screen. But I loved it so deeply, and I do think the queer element among many was like this notion of chosen family that's like a running theme in the show.
Yeah.
And but not only was like it was like I could sort of eavesdrop on and be a part of like a spirit of a queer family unit, without actually building it for myself, right? It was just there waiting for me every Tuesday, and then on VHS tape when I managed to like record an episode.
Speaking of VHS tape, this is on my keychain and has
oh my
been
God,
on
you've got
my
the little
keychain
sprinkly thing.
since-
Hell yeah.
Yeah, since I got it, I love it so much.
It was our wrap gift on the movie. It was like a fake little VHS keychain of the Curse of Mr. Sprinkly episode.
I love
It's
it.
also
Cute.
also on my keychain. But yeah, so I think it's like Buffy was such a deep part of my life, and like, but it feels so dissociative, right? And I think that's what the movie is unpacking. I was recently talking to one of my partners about my love of Buffy, and I was like, I used to fall asleep at night, just list the episodes of Buffy in order in my head. And then she was like, you can do that? And I was like, yeah, check it out. Welcome to the Hellmouth, The Harvest, The Witch, Teacher's Pet, Never Kill a Boy on the First Day, and I just like saw this look on her face that was sort of like, oh, like there's some trauma involved in all of this. And so yeah, the movie, right, is like celebrating this feeling of like seeing these flickers of queerness that, hinting at some kind of sense of liberation as a young person, but then the show or the screen as something that ultimately like, is not sufficient to bring you there in real life.
It's not enough. It's not enough. But it feels, when you have nothing else, it feels like. So no, I totally understand that.
I'm curious, do you have any TV shows like from when you were growing up that you feel kind of this way about, that were like that important to you? It's okay if the answer is no.
For me, it was always books.
Mm-hmm.
I was a really big reader. I watched a lot of television and movies, but I was such a big reader that like for me those old Christopher Pike books were like really very important. They were, because they were talking about quantum mechanics, like before we even knew, like in the world what that was, like the layman had no idea. So for me, like, that the books were sort of my escape. Mm-hmm. I think that's what Buffy really is in a way. It's an escape. It's going to a place where everything is okay, but there's conflict that will be resolved at the end, and we'll all move forward, and it'll be okay. And yeah, no, I didn't have like a TV show, but I had, like I said, I had books that were like that for me.
I mean, I also the Redwall series was like a series that and I'm not even that big on high fantasy, but like I loved it as a kid. Like, I remember I could not tell you that I don't remember which, but there's like an animal that one of the characters dies, they're animals. And I remember crying as a kid being like, oh no, blah, 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 whatever goofy name that like rodent had, like crying about that character dying and being like so upset. Jane, we obviously have the Buffy references. We have Pete and Pete. There's like definitely a lot of, I saw that you did a chat with Richard Kelly, because I kept thinking of Donnie Darko as well. That's my favorite movie. And there's definitely like a lot of David Lynch vibes. And I literally Googled your name, Donnie Darko, your name, Twin Peaks, all that you had talked about both those things as like things that like influenced you. What are some other like that maybe you haven't mentioned that have influenced this movie?
Jeez.
Or if we've exhausted all of them, that's
No, I mean,
okay,
I
too.
think it really it wears these sort of inspirations on its sleeve, right? And there are like aesthetic inspirations for the movie, you know, and just like art, like foreign art films that my DP and I would look at for specific shots. But then there are like the emotional influences, right? And like Buffy, obviously, and Twin Peaks, and Pete and Pete, and Are You Afraid of the Dark? And something like Donnie Darko, they all exist in this ecosystem of like what I think of as like the teen angst, you know, like canon for weird kind of gothy kids.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just like that's the world I wanted to swim in as a young person. And I do think there's a queer application to it, which is like when I was 14, I was like hanging out with the other like Bright Eyes fans in town and going to like basement punk shows and like
Yeah.
we didn't say queer and I don't think we had the language to say queer, but like what was drawing us to these sort of spaces of otherness and, you know, like dyed black hair and like, you know, loud music and eyeliner or whatever. Like it feels to me like a similar sort of elected, like you're electing your own othering because you know that there is like something that you're not fitting into in a normative way. And I just think that this genre, the like teen angst genre of movies and television, and especially from that time in the 90s, like it was such a treasure trove of that aesthetic that, you know, I think in many ways I was raised on. I think also like one thing I've been thinking a lot about with my work is that like I'm a snob, you know, and I'm like an art film snob, but like I wasn't raised on it. I was raised on television, you know, I was raised on Buffy and the X-Files and nerd shit. And but I don't think I'm just reverent to it. Like I think I've started to think of myself as in this tradition that maybe kind of started with like Spielberg and George Lucas in the 70s, who were like crafting these like romantic, folkloric, sort of dark fables of like suburban American life. Stephen King, I think also, right, is like there in like the
Totally.
DNA of this genre. And that mode of storytelling has been developed so deeply at this point from like, you know, Buffy to J.J. Abrams to like Marvel to our present moment. I think like because I was taught to think and love in that lingo, like it comes very naturally to me to be making like essentially like the structure of I Saw the TV Glow on one level is like literally just like an episode of Buffy, right? It's like normal again. It's yeah. No, and it's very much like playing within the margins of that type of genre storytelling, which is like Lost did an episode like that and Farscape did an episode like that. Like there is a tradition that I'm coming from, but I think I'm also like very suspicious of, or you know, I've started talking about it in terms of like the Western, you know, there's like the classical Western, like the 1940s, like John Ford, John Wayne, Kill the Indians Western. And the people who were raised as kids on that were like Martin Scorsese and Sam Peckinpah. And when they came of age in the 60s and 70s and started making their own movies, many of them were making Westerns, but they were making revisionist Westerns, right? They were making movies that were like adhering to the conventions of the genre while also sort of poking at the conventions, both in terms of like the politics of the conventions, but also just like the narrative tropes and structures of the conventions. And I think like when I think about my own space that I occupy and like the work that I make, I've started to think of it as almost like revisionist Buffy in this way, right? It's like revisionist Spielberg. It's like what comes after 50 years of this mode of storytelling, which is so tied to like the last 50 years of like capitalism and Western values and suburban malaise. Anyway, long-winded answer, but yeah, that's where I come from.
No, I might use that a little bit when I'm talking about my own writing to be like, well, because I feel like that sounds so much smarter than me when I'm like, well, I like those shows, so that's why I want to reference them. You touched upon normal again. So I saw TV Glow with a close straight guy friend. Nothing wrong with it. He's an okay, you know. I'm always like, you know, he's a good one. But like he loved it, and I was like, did you get the because he's never watched Buffy, and I was like, did you get the, and he was like, I mean, yeah, I got that it was referencing Buffy, but he also was like, I just kept seeing Pete and Pete, and I was like, that's also fair because that is, and you have the guy. I didn't even realize till um my friend Louis Peitzman told me, he was like, did you realize that that was the actors that played Pete and Pete? And I was like, oh shit, I did not realize that. How did you get them as well?
I think we just wrote him an email. They're lovely. Big Pete is like works on film sets. Actually, he does
Oh,
he does electric. And Little Pete's got a band. Little Pete's wife went into labor the day we shot their scene. He was having his, I think,
No.
second kid. But they came out. I think that they do a lot of like Pete and Pete convention. They're not like never talk about that type people. And yeah, I think like it was a different but similar notion to having Amber in the movie, right? Like I think when we see Amber, it feels like comforting
yeah.
and maybe even like maternal in this moment when like Maddie has disappeared, the TV show has been canceled, Owen's mother is about to pass away. It's just this again like moment of maternal grace. Whereas like when we see Pete and Pete, it's perhaps more of like a Lynchian moment where
Yeah.
like
Totally.
you're like, I kind of remember these faces, but I remember them as like kids, and now
Yeah.
they're like these men painted white standing in the middle distance staring at me. It's almost like this like Shakespearean, like ghost thing. But it felt like, yeah, that moment I think confuses people, right, who don't have that reference, but it felt worth it to me because it was like, yeah, the impact of seeing those faces aged is very specific, I think.
Yes. I feel like having all these, and then Fred Durst, it's like very like, I was surprised when I learned we were not closer to the same age because I was like, this is all everything that I liked from when I was a kid to when I was a teen. Um, and I mean, I was a Limp Bizkit gal back in the day.
Me too. Yeah. Yeah. I
Uh,
mean,
and what was it like getting Fred Durst? Because he only has one line in the movie, right?
yeah, but it's an important line.
I mean, yes, of course. Was he like very down?
Yeah, he was wonderful. He was so kind, such a sweetheart. Everyone was like really excited. I think everyone had the sense, like Amber is talking about, that like we were making something kind of meaningful, and I think each individual person like grasped that in their own way, and Fred certainly like, yeah, he was just like an incredibly generous collaborator. And I think everyone like expected him to sort of show up and stay in his trailer for the week that he was on set, but he was just hanging out and talking to everyone. And I think he like still texts with some of the PAs, and such a
Oh,
sweetie.
Nice.
But yeah, it was like, I don't know, it was very moving, I think, for everyone. I think especially with Amber, like I'll never forget like getting on a Zoom call with Amber and just being like, oh my God, I can't believe I get to do this. And just like telling you like what Buffy and what that relationship and what your performance had meant to me, and like why I thought it was meaningful to have you in the movie. And yeah, just like it was emotional. And I remember my sweet assistant Seppi was on the call, and then I remember afterwards, like she called me and she was just like, I like cried when you guys were talking. It was so emotional. and
oh.
uh and yeah, so it was both like each of these elements is going into this larger thing that I'm building and constructing, and also like there was something that was like meaningful or moving in a sort of like meta physical way about each individual encounter, because like it wasn't just like, let me put this like idea in the movie. It's like, let me build human relationships with people and like collaborate. I think there's an instinct to just treat casting as sort of like, let me just find the person to like build, like fulfill my idea of this
Yeah.
character. And like I'm such a believer in like, I want to be like collaborating with other human beings, and like the even for one scene, like putting somebody's face on a screen, is like that's a human thing, and tried to treat it as such.
Well, it's such a journey movie,
Yes.
and everybody that you cast with that nostalgia emotional factor is like a touchstone on the journey, and they build on each other, so it's very emotional, and the emotional arc, you're kind of meeting those beats with those casting points too, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Was there, I am curious if there was anyone that you wanted to get, but you couldn't for like a cameo like that.
I was definitely like one Buffy person is enough, like
Yeah.
on the Buffy front. Although there was a moment when we were thinking about before we cast Emma Portner, who plays all of the monsters in the movie and is an amazing dancer. I was kind of like, oh wait, we can just cast one person and they can dance if for all of the monsters. Before that, we were like talking about potential names to play Mr. Melancholy, and it was a long list. But I remember one dark horse that I was pushing for was Principal Snyder, the actor who played Principal Snyder. I was like, that would hit.
That would be amazing.
That was not who I was anticipating. I was like, oh, I wonder what they're gonna say, and that was not even in my head of Ledge. But I meant more like in general 90s. Were there any other like?
No, I think we got them all. There were also some like, if Fred Durst wasn't going to do it, my other idea for that role was Jimmy Fallon. That's like, if Jimmy Fallon is glaring at you from a couch, you're in trouble. But I remember also at one point I was like, should it be like Tom Green on that couch glaring?
Oh, whoa.
I think it's like cast. It's not just like let me fill the movie with 90s references.
Right, yeah,
it's sort of like hopefully the casting in general like paints a picture, So it's always I think I felt that like if it became that, if it became like spot the reference bingo, then like the movie would maybe not be as evocative as if it was sort of like sprinkling ideas,
Jane, that was something when I have not stopped talking about the movie since I saw it. And whenever I recommend it to people, I specifically say that. I'm like, the cameos are great, but they're not, and I say this as someone who watches them, it's not a Marvel movie, right? Like it's like those cameos are there for a reason, and it's not, like you said, it's not spot the cameo, because like I didn't even realize those were the actors that played Pete and Pete, and the scene still worked for me as like, oh, this is creepy and like a David Lynch like episode of like Twin Peaks. Like that's what that felt like to me, and it still worked without even realizing that that's who they were. And I don't think I realized that was Fred Durst till like halfway through the movie.
I tried to get him in the red hat. I was a coward. I sent my costume designer in to be like, hey, so we were wondering, would you wear the red hat? And he was just like, no. And we were like, all right, fair enough.
When I would try to like see if you had said this in an interview, the scene where he is glaring from he's lit like, so he looks like the shadows are like a Buffy vampire, right? Is that on purpose?
We painted him white. So he definitely looks extraterrestrial or demonic in some way. I don't know that the intention was specifically like a Buffy vampire, but I can see it for sure. We should have given him the little wrinkles,
Yeah. And is it Normal again one of your favorite episodes, or just happened to be?
No. I do love season 6 of Buffy. I have a soft spot in my heart for it, and there are some low lows I think in that season for me, but I think I appreciated it because it's like the show. I don't care for season 7. I think that the show like is having a bit of like an identity crisis every season, where it's like trying to figure out what it should be, and if it should be getting back to basics, or if it should be doing something new and different. And and that's sort of like the way that Buffy unfurls post high school.
Yeah.
And I think I always like really enjoyed season 6 from like this perspective of like demystifying so much of like the mythology and magic of the show, right? Like this idea that like the villains that season are just like incels basically. And that like Buffy is fixing the plumbing. Like I know a lot of people, and I remember at the time, like people really hating that mundanity, but
Yeah.
I think like that really worked for me in many ways as this like peeling back the layers of artifice and trying to like push push the show into something that could be commenting on like becoming an adult in, you know, as moving away as like what it was doing about coming of age in high school. And so I think season 6 for me as like a season exploring that, like Normal again becomes like a perfect like sort of standalone episode that reinforces like the themes of the season, right? It's like the episode is sort of about like there's even a speech in it, I think, where the doctor is like, you've had these like in, you know, these crazy fantasies of monsters, but now it's like starting to crumble a little bit, and like you're, you know, you're not what you used to be, essentially. And so I always loved the episode for that thematic idea. It's not like it wouldn't even be in my top like 40 Buffy episodes probably at the end of the day, but it was very useful, right, for like the structure of this movie and this very TV tropey idea of like the characters are hallucinating a thing while they're actually slowly dying. But it's like Field Trip, the X-Files episode where Mulder and Scully get trapped underground and hallucinate this whole world, or like, again, that Farscape episode, or the Lost one where you think Hurley might actually be in the institution the whole time. There's like a long lineage of this sort of episode in that era of genre TV.
Emily St. James wrote about how interpreted the ending as very uplifting. I interpret it, for me, but I am like a cis dude, like I interpreted it as they're following the normal again, where it's like, well, like we're still ending on like like where like it kind of is up in the air. And like I did just like for my own coming out, where it's like you do come out and then like shit sometimes still sucks. Like
fits and starts also.
Yeah.
It's not a linear thing.
Do you see it as like, where do you view the ending? Like, how did you write it?
Well, first, just on the Normal again front, like the end of that episode is fascinating, right? Because we
Drove me nuts for the longest time.
Yeah, we end in the hospital, right? It's like it sort of nods to that being a layer of reality deeper than the reality of the show that we're going to go and continue watching next week. So that's interesting.
When Justice Smith opened his chest in the mirror, I was like, okay, either this is going to be the end or we're going to end on a depressing note because this is normal again and we're following. And I was like, oh no. But then I like thought about it more and I was like, okay, yeah, maybe it's not so depressed. Like you said, it's like the ebbs and flows with coming out sometimes.
I think for me, it was like ending the movie with any notion of just like liberation would have felt disingenuous. Like I've been saying, like, and I do want to make a sequel. I know exactly what it will be. I want to wait a little bit, but I do want to make another film that's like sort of in this world.
I love that.
But I feel like I always had the instinct that like to get Owen into season 6, that's another movie at least. Like that's this is a movie about like what it took me half of my life to do, which is just to like see myself clearly. And that moment isn't so clean that it's like, okay, cool. We can all go home and have a good dinner with our family now. Like it's the instinct is just to, like it's terror. And it's like I need to go and apologize for myself because that's the only thing I've been taught. And maybe we see something in Owen's expression in those last few scenes that's changed and that, you know, can give us a hint that he will be able to do with this information something that might eventually lead him into a life that's, you know, more real. But it was outside the margins of the movie to take him there, I think.
I love the idea that you are already thinking in terms of like if you would make a sequel or if you would make in that world that's like maybe not a direct sequel. I actually love when like writers, directors do that kind of stuff where it's like, this is a sequel, but it's not two. It's just like, it is another movie, but like, yes, it is in that world. That's like my favorite kind of sequel.
I just want to take it back for a second to the ending of the film, because I think when you talk about that, like that revisionist sort of way of doing business, like television is all about like an ending that gives you closure. It's like, oh, we're done
Yeah.
for like, it's so much like the end of the episode, and now we can go on to the next story. Whereas I think that is not real life. And so playing with the trope of that, this idea that like everything has to have a pat ending, for better or for worse. It has to say something, and you have to walk away with a thing that you then take with you to the next. I loved that with this film, it wasn't cut and dried. It was very much, left open. It was enigmatic in a way, and I thought that was I was really glad that it ended that way, and it wasn't like, oh no, now he's so happy and he knows who
Right.
he
Yeah.
is and he gets to be whatever he wants to be. Yay, we figured it all out, and an hour and a half. Wow, how exciting for us.
You
Yeah,
solved queer issues in an hour and a half.
yeah, it's awesome. I just yeah. So I just wanted to
Thank
say
you.
how happy I was with that when I read the script, and then like when I was and I have to also say that the set was one of the most amazing sets I've ever been on. Like everybody was so happy to be there. It was so inclusive, and you just felt like you're a part of a family. You just walk in and everybody was like just so kind, and it was just an incredible set. And that's also kudos to you, because that's
Oh.
not always how it goes. So it says a lot about who you are as a creator, because it starts at the top and works its way down. And if the person at the top is not respectful and empathetic to the people they are working with, then it's not a fun experience. So thank you for making it such a wonderful experience, and for putting together such an incredible cast and crew. Really and truly.
Well, thank you. I have to tell what I was like. I have to tell this story on the podcast because I haven't told this to Amber yet. When I was on the way to Sundance for the premiere of the movie, we flew out of LaGuardia, and like literally the first thing I saw when I got through security was like a big poster for your Buffy book. It was like an Audible ad, and it was like Amber Benson in big letters there. And I like immediately took a picture and sent it. I took a picture in front of your name and sent it to like everyone on the team. I was just like, this is a good sign, everyone.
I'm cheering you on from the poster. That's so funny.
Inversely, hilariously, I was in LA this weekend for a Buffy convention that's at Torrance High. And while I was there, the day before the convention, I went out in WeHo, and my friend that I was with hadn't seen I Saw the TV Glow, but said, the actor from the movie you won't shut up about just walked by us. And I was like, wait, really? And I didn't see him, but like, I was like, I'm going to take this as a good sign for the interview on Tuesday, that like Justice Smith walked by me and I was at a Buffy convention. Like,
this is how you know you're in the normal again hallucination world. Yeah.
Justice is so good in everything, but specifically in this film.
Yeah.
Like Justice is incredible. That was such a role.
Yeah, and it's so physicalized what he did. Like he definitely taught me a lot about acting. Like watching him craft each moment, like just from a purely physical perspective.
And
amazing.
Full like just I had only seen him in a few other things, like like more like Jurassic Parky, the Pokemon movie, and so I mean, and I always found him charming in those roles anyway. But this I was like, holy shit, like he is a capital A actor. Like this is was it how long did it take y'all to find cast that lead role?
It was one of the first people that we talked to. I think we sent it to like a few people at the same time, and he was one of the like 3 or 4 names on that list. And it really appealed to me. And I think he because of what you guys were talking about, like I'd seen him in a number of things. He had always been so charismatic, but he had also always been like a completely different presence. Like I'd seen him play like sort of like pushover husband and like bravado queer guy and like and everything in between. And so I really I was like, okay, I think he takes his craft incredibly seriously, because you can see it in how he disappears into these roles. And the idea of giving him like this kind of challenge was just really appealing.
That's so nice. Just curious for both of you, actually, favorite horror movies, like some of your favorite.
I mean, for me, it's like Evil Dead 2, Scream, Possession, Return of the Living Dead, Suspiria. I could go on.
Jane, wait, I love that list is like more indie or like old school horror, and you have Scream in there because this painting is of Courtney Cox from a promo from Scream 1.
Oh, whoa.
That a very nice listener on my podcast bought for me from Etsy.
Oh,
And it's like
cute.
painted on a canvas, and it is like one of my prized possessions. Like I love
Cute.
it. Um, Amber, what about you?
I go very psychological horror. I love The Shining, Rosemary's Baby, Suspiria is on my list. Man, there's so many. There's so many good ones. I do like a good like old school slasher. Give me a Friday the 13th. Not so into the new stuff. I feel I'm less interested in the like high end like Saw kind of horror where it's just like it's a lot of violence
Yeah.
for violence sake. And that it's all fine. Like it just for me it's not as exciting.
Same, yeah.
Yeah. I like stuff that has a little bit of thought to it and is
You
a
know,
little like
I will
dark
say I
and
defend those first 3 Saw movies because I do think there's a little bit. I think like they're not as like they're gory, but not as I don't know. I saw the last one.
I've been watching them all for the first time with my
Yeah?
friend.
Oh my god, give me your hot takes.
I'm loving it. It's like a male soap opera, you know? It's like by the time you get to like Saw, I think we've watched 6 of them. And like by the time you get to Saw 6, it's like so confusing. And the C and D and E plots in each movie, it's just like you need like an encyclopedia to reference it all.
Right.
And it's just but at the end of the day, it's also just like it's like wrestling, you know? It's like
Yeah.
who's gonna be the new heavyweight Jigsaw, you know?
Right, because doesn't Jigsaw actually die in like 3?
Mhm.
Right, and then but he's still in all of them, but like it's always like a weird flashback.
You always
and-
get some flashbacks, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah.
My timeline of those movies is like when I saw Saw 10,
Saw.
yeah, I was like I should have done a full rewatch because I do not like where in the timeline are we? Like, is he already Jigsaw? Like I wasn't sure if he was already Jigsaw.
Here's my do you want to hear my pitch? Because you know, it's impossible for me to
Yes.
watch like the Saw
Yes.
movies and not be like, if I was gonna do a Saw, what would it be?
Yes. Let's
I
hear
really
it.
want to hear this. Yes.
You don't really get John Kramer, Mr. Saw himself. You don't really get his backstory until like Saw 4, I think. In Saw 4, you find out that like his wife got stabbed by like a drug user and she had a miscarriage, and so he had to just do Saw, and it's like the worst explanation, you know? It's just like that's why this guy has like murdered like dozens and dozens of people. It's just like that doesn't even scratch the surface of like the psychology behind this. And so I think we need like a Saw, like I think I want to know who his father is. I want to know how he was raised, and I want him to be like, I want to see him like in his 20s, like resisting the urge to Saw. And you know, I think
You want to see the generational trauma of Saw.
exactly. Yeah. I want to see him try to go to art school, you know, but then get pulled back into it.
Then oops, he has to put someone in a trap, and well,
he's building these like traps in art school, and everyone's sort of like put off by it, you know. And
I love that you're into Saw. Jane, you know, I really appreciate the like, you're like, well, I'm a little pretentious with the art house movies, but also I love the Saw. Like, I'm going through the Saw movies and I love them. We love a range. Because I always say, like, Scream is one of my favorite horror movies, but like, I also love Hereditary. Like, that's also one of my favorite horror movies, and they're very different, you know, versions. And I do feel like Scream makes sense also for a Buffy fan to really like, right? Like, Jane, don't you feel like it's like they're, especially from that era of like, I don't know, I remember just being so happy that like Courtney Cox was able to be like this woman who was like kind of an asshole, ambitious, and like wasn't punished. Like, I feel like normally in a horror movie, she absolutely would have been dead and not lasted this long.
I think it's also like those 90s, that 90s post Tarantino moment where like everything was sort of in on its own joke, you know? And that's such a huge part of Buffy, I think. And when I watched Scream, it was like, I was like, wait, they're talking about how there are like tropes in a horror movie, and then they're doing those tropes. That's the coolest thing ever.
One of my friends, Kirsten White, she actually wrote 2 Buffy books. She was a big horror person, but only got into it as an adult and had watched more modern horror. And I kept being like, please watch Scream. I know you'll love it. I know. And she was like, well, she had issues with like, a lot of those like older slashers are pretty sexist, where it's like the
Totally.
women are stupid. They don't know what they're doing. Oh, they fall over, they get stabbed. And I was like, but Scream's not like that. I promise it's not. And then she like watched the first one and then watched all of them in a week. It was like, oh, I loved those. And I loved hearing same thing with Buffy too, right? I loved hearing someone who is just watching it telling me what they thought about it. And like, she clearly didn't have a nostalgia lens because she didn't watch it back then. So I always love hearing people's takes on things I love, which sometimes gets me in trouble in this podcast. Because if it's something I love and someone's going to tell me why maybe they don't like the stuff I love, I'm still interested in hearing about it. I'm like, cool, tell me why. Cool. Thank you to both of you for doing this. This was such a nice conversation. Jane, I got to tell you, next week I'm recording an episode just on the movie with some of our co-hosts.
Yay.
I wanted to make sure I did this first so I could be like, well, Jane said in our episode.
Jane said the ending is happy.
Actually, everyone's wrong. Jane said this, so I know.
Dumbledore is straight in the universe of I Saw the TV Glow. As the creator, I can retcon for everyone that Dumbledore is straight in my movie.
But everyone else is queer.
Yeah, everyone else is gay. Yeah.
I love
Harry's trans, Hermione's trans, and they are all sucking and fucking, and
I love it.
I just friend Alyssa, who's also a big Buffy fan, had I forget what the symbol is called, the Deathly Hallows symbol for Harry Potter, and they are trans, and I just saw this morning, it reminded me of that they got the trans flag put over.
Fuck yeah.
The like symbol, and I was like, oh, that, like, because they were like, it still means a lot to me, but like, fuck her. And I thought that was a really nice way of like doing that, right? Like, I don't know, still being like, yeah, I like this thing, but like, fuck that author, and yes, thank you both for doing this. Jane, let everyone know where they can find you on socials and stuff.
Oh, my Twitter handle is Sapphic Spielberg.
Which A+ handle, by the way.
Thank you. There's one letter missing. I think there's no E at the end of Spielberg because character limits. That's mostly where I hang out on the internet. But the movie is rentable now, so you don't need to be in a movie theater to watch it.
Go rent it right now. Go rent
it. And yeah, I'm so happy to have been on here, and Amber, so sweet to see you.
Oh, I know. Mwah, mwah, mwah. I'm blowing you kisses from LA.
Amber, let everyone know where they can find you.
I tend not to be on there very much anymore. It just got so intense and kind of hostile on the internets and the socials.
No, what are you talking about? No, never.
No. So like I sometimes will lurk, and I like to look at like the Instagram. So yeah, I'm around. I'm there, but I don't really.
Amber's watching you, but you can't watch her.
Yeah.
Damn straight. That's so creepy. I'm the creepiest.
Well, thank you to everyone who is listening or watching this. If you like Slayerfest 98, you can find us on Spotify. You can watch our videos on YouTube. Anywhere else you get your podcast, you can support us on Patreon. We are going through X-Men the Animated Series and Batman the Animated Series. Talk about nostalgia. And you can find us on social at SlayerFestX98. You can find me at Ian X Carlos, and thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Talk to you all later.
Ian.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
This is so fun.